In the late 19th century, the role of government was pretty minuscule, at least when it comes to the lower and middle working class. The main focus was expansion of industry and land. In the late 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had just ended. In the 19th century, most of the control was by the industries. The country was really just being run by CEOs and factory owners. This was a time of poor quality of life and work. In the 1870s, there was this thing called the pool. This was a secret agreement between companies to share the market and fix prices. There were the holding companies of the 1890s. These were companies who owned other companies.
Finally, the government stepped in. In 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was signed. It prohibits activities that reduce competition between companies. Basically, it outlaws contracts and conspiracies that restrain trade.
The Sherman Antitrust Act was named after its author, Senator John Sherman, Ohio Republican, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, who was also Rockefeller's colleague. This bill was unanimously passed by the House of Representatives. Everybody was in favor of this act. It was just that important.
The purpose of the Sherman Act is not to protect businesses from the working of the market. It is to protect the public from the failure of the market. The law directs itself not against conduct which is competitive, even severely so, but against conduct which unfairly tends to destroy competition itself. This act was first used in 1894 against the American Railway Union. It was not for several years that this act would be used against the original target, American corporations and monopolies.
In 1901, Teddy Roosevelt became the 26th President of the United States. His election was basically the start of the progressive era. Progressivism is a political movement that represents the interests of ordinary people in their roles as taxpayers, consumers, employees, and American citizens in general. Progressivism basically champions government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The progressives, with Theodore Roosevelt in front of them, were committed to changing and reforming every aspect of the state, society, and economy. With the help of muckrakers, progressives exposed corruption and inequality in factories by causing scandals. Public's dissatisfaction and several strikes led to some major political reforms being made. Most important of them all were the 16th Amendment Act, which authorized a federal income tax, then 17th Amendment, which allowed people directly elect senators. 18th Amendment, also known as the Prohibition Act, which legally forbidden use, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. Finally, 19th Amendment was a big win for women's rights in America because this act let women vote and made them more equal to men. Also, expanded role of government took place during Progressive era. People started believing that government should take more responsibility to increase decent well-being of America's citizens. In response, government passed many social welfare programs such as unemployment benefits, accident and health insurance, and social security system for the disabled and the elderly. Also, many municipal reforms were passed as well. For example, cities took over utilities such as clean water, gas, and electricity. Many new playgrounds, kindergartens, and the lodging houses for the homeless were opened. And finally, in order to involve more people into choosing their own candidates and actually having influence in lawmaking, such reforms as direct primaries, initiative, referendum, and recall were passed. They all give voters the ability to directly get involved in their country's governmental elections.
Mr. Roosevelt, thank you very much for coming here and meeting us today.
Oh, yes, yes.
So, shall we talk about progressivism?
Oh, yes.
What is progressivism to you? What does it mean to you personally?
To me, progressivism is a general philosophy in favor of social, political, and economic reform.
Reform in what sense?
Well, I'm talking in terms of expansion. In my opinion, the government is here to serve the people. I feel that the only way to do this is by allowing the government to be a bit more involved.
And how exactly will the government be more involved, as you say?
Well, it's already been happening. It started with the Sherman Antitrust Act. You see, I have signed many acts. There was the Food and Drug Act. It is a U.S. federal law that provides the federal inspection of meat products and forbids the manufacture, sale, or transportation of poisonous patent medicines. This act arose because of muckrakers like Upton Sinclair.
Thank you. And would you mind telling me more about the square deal you're doing?
Well, basically, it's quite simple. I offered America a square deal. Your character and personal abilities will be valued above your socioeconomic class.
The Square Deal was President Roosevelt's three-part domestic program. The three basic ideas of it are as follows: conservation of natural resources, control of corporations, and consumer protection. Basically, it was intended to protect the working-class citizen and fight against plutocracy. But at the same time, Roosevelt tried to protect corporations from the extreme demands of organized labor. In his second term, he tried to take his Square Deal to a whole new level. In 1903, Roosevelt passed another act. This act granted equal access to the railroad system. This act was called the Elkins Act. The railroads had been giving cashback rebates to favored companies. This act also allowed the ICC, or Interstate Commerce Commission, to regulate and control the maximum prices the railroads could charge. FDR proved that the government can restore hope in times of hardship. He did this with his inaugural address.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly.
He even coined the term, "the only thing we have to fear is fear itself."
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The purpose of this address was actually to give Americans hope during the Depression. The Great Depression began with the stock market crash of October 1929. 2 months later, stockholders lost more than $40 billion. One by one, banks went bankrupt and started to close. This resulted in people losing all of their savings. The stock market crash, people from all classes stopped purchasing items and trade decreased. With the decrease in trade, production of items soon decreased. With the production cuts, unemployment rose to an all-time high. This job loss caused less spending, which in turn cut down on production, which in turn cut down on jobs. It was a vicious cycle. It was imperative for the government to intervene, and that's exactly what FDR did. The New Deal was a series of economic reforms in order to help stimulate the economy. In the first 100 days of the New Deal, fiscal policy was reformed, there was a banking reform, a monetary reform, a security regulation, and a repeal of the prohibition. In 1935 to 1938, the New Deal had created the Social Security Act, labor relations, work progress administration, tax policy, and the Housing Act of 1937.